This week on Engage the Sage.
Hi everyone, I'm Don Saucier. Welcome to this week's episode of Engage the Sage. Last week I talked to you about reasons you might want to consider stopping giving exams in class. I also mentioned an alternative to giving traditional in-class exams might be to have students write and take their own exams. I call those exams by you, and I'm going to talk about those now. Midway through the spring 2020 semester, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, my university, and probably yours as well, went to remote learning for all of our classes. So all of our classes that had been in person got moved to remote teaching modalities. Up to that point, I had used traditional in-class exams, just like the ones I told you not to use last week. I had used those exams. So I had students come in, they had one full class period to answer silently and without resources the questions that my TA and I wrote on those exams. After the transition to remote teaching and learning, though, that wasn't going to work anymore. We didn't have the opportunity to proctor those exams, to provide that exam security, to make sure students weren't using those resources, or to kind of keep them on the schedule that we normally would for those traditional in-class exams. We and our students were also facing other challenges during the pandemic at that point. If you had kids, maybe you were now having to do homeschooling and dealing with childcare responsibilities. Maybe you were dealing with family care or elder care that you didn't have to deal with prior to the pandemic. And maybe you were just trying to stay on top of things during a pandemic. So what we did is we infused empathy to our courses. We redesigned what we had done in our courses. We've talked about empathetic course design in previous videos, and definitely make sure you check those out. We have one specifically on empathetic assessments and assignments that also you should check out. But what we did is we decided that those traditional in-class exams that we had been using would not work, and we replaced them with something that we think works better. We think exams by you. Exams that are written and completed by students themselves work better than traditional in-class exams. And I'm going to talk to you about what they are and also some advantages and disadvantages of using exams by you in your classes. So as I've said, exams by you are exams that your students write and then answer for themselves. What we do is we set the number of items that they're going to write, we set the number of words that they're going to use in their answers, and we set the rubrics and guidelines that they're going to have for the content they're going to cover, how many of those items might be representing the in-class material versus the outside of class material like the course readings and the textbook. In the rubric that we both provide to our students and use to grade the exams, we specify the number of points per item. We specify the number of points that are related to the items covering the breadth of the information for that content. We have points devoted to the accuracy and the quality of the answers that they have in answering the items that they wrote for themselves. We also provide a number of very explicit tips to guide our students to successfully completing their exams by you. One of our strong recommendations is that our students work on the exams progressively over the academic unit. So maybe they write and answer one of their own questions or a couple of their questions each week of that academic unit. We also recommend to our students that they write items that require critical thinking. So not just listing or defining concepts or otherwise regurgitating the content. We have them write items that require them to think about, apply the content in meaningful ways. We recommend that they use words that inspire higher levels of learning. So those words at the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Some of the words we recommend they use might be words like adapt, choose, compare, construct, contrast, create, design, evaluate, improve, predict, propose, and recommend. We're trying not to have them just give information, but to do something useful with that information. We want them to demonstrate that they have thought about and learned those concepts. Now, we do tell our students that using those words does not guarantee that they're having a very good item, an item that demonstrates critical thinking, but using those words is going to get them closer. We also recommend that our students have items that are written to have them provide examples and applications of the information. Items that ask them to consider the question, why? So rather than just listing information, we want them to do something critically important to learning it. We also recommend to our students that they consider including more than one theory or concept into each item to ensure that they're covering more of the content in that academic unit. So as an example, in an upper level class, we might have an exam by you represent about 4 weeks of content and to have our students write 10 items and answer those items for that academic unit. And we might provide a maximum of 200 words for each of those 10 answers. Now, one of the things you may have heard me talk about before is that I like to put maximums on my student products. So I like to have a maximum number of words or pages or minutes, if they're creating videos, for instance, in the work that our students do. The reasons that I use maximums is twofold. Number one, I want to make sure that my students are adhering to those 4 C's of writing, that they're being clear, complete, concise, and compelling. When I set a maximum, it's more likely I'm going to get their second draft, not their first draft, as they really try to get the essence of what it is they're trying to express. The other advantage of setting a maximum is not only providing a higher quality answer, but an answer that is easier for us to grade. And I think it's important that we remember that everything we assign comes back. Setting a maximum is going to make it easier for you. So now I'm going to share with you some of the advantages to using exams by you in your classes to have your students write and answer their own exams. The first advantage is they avoid a lot of the issues that I raised in our video last time about giving traditional in-class exams. So check that out and see, hey, a lot of these issues have been resolved. Second advantage is your students can work on the exams by you when and where they want. Another advantage is your students can work progressively on the exams by you over that academic unit, so they can demonstrate their learning as it happens. Another advantage is you can scale these up or scale these down depending on your class. You might use this as only a part of the assessment of an academic unit that you're teaching, or you might use it as the whole thing. So it's a very flexible strategy for assessment. Another advantage, and this is huge, is that students report less test anxiety in doing exams by you versus traditional in-class exams. So we remove test anxiety at least a little bit as a factor in supporting our students' success in the demonstration of their learning. One of the biggest advantages in my experience in working with exams by you and from the student feedback that I've received is my students are able to successfully demonstrate their learning and to do so in personally meaningful ways. Now, there are some disadvantages to using exams by you that you have to be aware of if you're going to use this. First of these is that these are a lot of work. There is going to be a lot of planning and effort on the part of your students. And if they have a tendency to procrastinate the exams by you until the due date, it's going to be hard for them to get them done successfully. I will also admit these take longer to grade than maybe a multiple choice exam will be. So there's going to be more of an investment in your part in seeing whether or not your students have demonstrated their learning in that academic unit. Another issue with exams by you is because your students have a lot of freedom and a lot of creativity involved, which I think is a good thing, that creativity means you can't necessarily anticipate how they're going to demonstrate their learning. And this might make it a little bit harder to create a specific rubric for your grading. Another issue is, as I've mentioned, we have points associated with the breadth of the information they cover. There might be a possibility that your students could try to avoid the most difficult or complicated information in that academic unit. I will say the biggest disadvantage of the ones I've mentioned is that procrastination opportunity. It is possible for your students to put these off. And despite all of the reminders and all the recommendations to work progressively, if your students don't take those recommendations, it might get stressful at the end for them. So the question is, should you use exams by you in your classes? Well, admittedly, there are pros and cons to doing so, and I want you to think about whether or not this is going to work for your class, for your students, and for your teaching philosophy. And I hope you consider these, and if you decide not to, that's great. But do think about this as a possibility for getting beyond those traditional in-class exams that have the issues that we've talked about before. I've asked my students in previous semesters, should we use exams by you? Should we do it in future semesters and in future classes? And overwhelmingly, they said yes. They see this as a successful way to demonstrate their learning. But they also tell us that we should be really, 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 really clear that we really, really mean it to those future students when we tell them to work progressively throughout the academic unit. So I've just told you about exams by you. The strategy that I use in my class is to have my students write and take their own exams. I think this is a wonderful alternative to traditional in-class exams that gets around a lot of the issues that we've talked about before. I think exams by you are a wonderfully creative and engaging way for our students to demonstrate their learning in our classes. I also think this is a way for our students to personally apply their learning in meaningful ways so that they can see the value in what they're learning in our classes. In the comments below, I would love to hear your reactions to exams by you. I would love to hear your thoughts about having students write and answer their own exams. And I would also love to hear about all the innovative ways that you use in your classes to assess your students' learning and to support their success. Thank you for watching this episode of Engage the Sage. Please like, subscribe, sign up for notifications, share us on social media, and we'll see you next time on Engage the Sage.